the last years of the 19th century, a great fever swept across the American continent. Word had come down from the far north. Gold had been found in the Klondike. Tens of thousands of men and women abandoned ordinary life and turned their faces toward Alaska, toward the mountains, toward fortune. What awaited them was not glory, but one of the most punishing landscapes on Earth. The principal routes into the Yukon interior passed through the port of Skagway, Alaska, and then up, steeply, dangerously up, across either the Chilkoot Pass or the White Pass. Canadian authorities, determined to prevent disaster, would not let a prospector cross the border unless he carried a full ton of supplies for the winter. A ton of supplies, hauled over snow and ice, by hand, in stages, across mountain summits. Most men made the journey many times over. The human cost was staggering. The need for a better way was obvious to anyone who looked. In 1897 alone, the Canadian government received 32 separate proposals for a Yukon railroad. Most came to nothing. But one did not. 3 separate companies organized that year to build a rail line from Skagway to the interior. Financed largely by British investors organized through Close Brothers Merchant Bank and guided by railroad contract builder Michael James Hinney, the effort settled on a 3-foot narrow gauge. The choice was deliberate. Narrow gauge meant a narrower roadbed, which meant lower costs when blasting through solid rock, and there would be a great deal of blasting. Even so, 450 tons of explosives were consumed reaching the summit of White Pass alone. The tight gauge also allowed tighter curves, letting the line follow the shape of the land rather than fighting it at every turn. Construction began in May of 1898. Almost immediately, the builders found themselves entangled in something they had not anticipated. Skagway, at that moment, was not a town governed by law. It was a town governed by a man named Soapy Smith, a confidence man of remarkable audacity who held the settlement in his grip. The railroad's president, Samuel H. Graves, became chairman of the vigilante organization working to remove Smith and his gang. On the evening of July 8, 1898, Smith was killed in a confrontation on Juneau Wharf. Graves witnessed it. The railroad itself helped block the escape routes of Smith's men, aiding in their capture. With that, the worst of Skagway's troubles subsided, and construction could proceed in earnest. 13 days later, on July 21, 1898, an excursion train carried passengers 4 miles out of Skagway, the first train ever to operate in Alaska. On July 30th, the 3 founding companies were consolidated into the White Pass and Yukon Railway Company Limited, organized in London. By mid-February of 1809, construction had clawed its way to the summit of White Pass, 2,885 feet above sea level, 20 miles from where it had begun. By July of that year, the rails reached Bennett, British Columbia. Crews pushed on from both ends, and on July 29, 1900, the last spike was driven. Service began 2 days later. There is a footnote worth remembering. A gold spike had been prepared for the ceremony, but gold is soft, and when the hammer fell, it did not drive into the tie, it simply bent. An ordinary iron spike finished the job. By the time the railroad opened, the great gold rush fever had already begun to cool, but the Yukon did not empty. Serious mining, for copper, silver, and lead, was taking its place. The White Pass and Yukon route became the only practical connection between these mines and the outside world. For years, there was no road from Skagway to Whitehorse. The railroad was not merely convenient, it was essential. By June of 1914, the line operated 11 locomotives, 15 passenger cars, and 233 freight cars across 110 miles of track, and it remained profitable while every other Yukon railroad had been abandoned. Through the lean years of the Great Depression, trains sometimes ran as infrequently as once a week. The railroad endured. Then came the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Alaska took on critical strategic importance. The United States and Canada committed to building the Alaska Highway, and the principal staging point for that effort was Whitehorse, a city that could be reached at that moment only by the White Pass and Yukon route. The railroad was aging, its equipment worn, but it rose to the moment in a way few would have predicted. In the first 9 months of 1942 alone, the line moved 67,496 short tons of freight, more than double its entire pre-war annual traffic. It was deemed insufficient. The United States government leased the railroad effective October 1, 1942, placing it under United States Army control. What became the 770th Railway Operating Battalion took over operations alongside the railroad's civilian staff. The Army scoured the country for usable narrow-gauge locomotives and rolling stock, and a remarkable assembly arrived at Skagway. Engines from Colorado, from the Silverton Northern, from the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. The original roster of 10 locomotives and 83 cars was soon dwarfed by an additional 26 engines and 258 cars. In 1943, the line carried 281,962 short tons, the equivalent of 10 years of typical pre-war traffic. This was accomplished despite some of the most severe winter weather recorded since 1910. With temperatures falling to 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and storms that blocked the line for weeks at a time. On August 4, 1943, the single peak day of the war effort, the White Pass moved 38 trains totaling more than 3,000 gross tons in 24 hours. Control was returned to civilian operators late in 1944. The post-war decades brought modernization. The railroad dieselized in the mid to late 1950s, one of the few narrow-gauge lines in North America to make that transition. It pioneered early containerized freight, advertising itself as the container route, and owned one of the earliest container ships in North American service. When the Faro lead zinc mine opened in 1969, the railroad invested heavily in new locomotives, new freight queues, improved alignment, and new port facilities at Skagway. It was a substantial bet on continued ore traffic. The bet did not hold. In 1982, metal prices collapsed. The mines closed. The White Pass and Yukon route, dependent on that ore revenue, ran at a loss for several months, carrying only passengers before shutting down entirely on October 7, 1982. But even then, the story was not finished. Tourism to Alaska was growing. Cruise ships were arriving at Skagway in increasing numbers, and the scenery of the White Pass route, the narrow ledges above the gorges, the alpine valleys, the descent from the summit, was exactly what those passengers had come to see. Cruise operators recognized the line's historic appeal and pushed for its revival as a heritage railway. Following an agreement with the United Transportation Union, the White Pass route reopened between Skagway and White Pass in 1988. This time for tourist passenger traffic. In '94, the railroad was designated an International Historic Civil Engineering Landmark by both the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering and the American Society of Civil Engineers. The line has grown since. By 2006, roughly 63% of the original route was back in service. The railroad still runs vintage parlor cars, the oldest built in 1881, predating the White Pass itself by 17 years. Steam locomotive number 73, a Baldwin-built Mikado purchased in 1947, retired in 1964, and restored to service in 1982, still runs. From gold rush desperation to wartime necessity, from industrial workhorse to heritage treasure, the White Pass and Yukon route has outlasted nearly every narrow-gauge railroad in North America. It climbs still through the same mountains on the same 3-foot gauge, over grades blasted out of rock by men who needed to reach a dream before it disappeared. If you found this history worth knowing, subscribe for more stories of human ambition in steel, stone, and concrete.